Aviation-Quest CC 101, wind 270 degrees, 10 knots, runway 27 left, cleared for takeoff.
Aviation-Quest CC 101, cleared for takeoff 27 left. V1, rotate. Positive climb.
Aviation-Quest CC. Stories from above. The views shared in this podcast are personal and for informational purposes only. They do not reflect any employer or aviation authority, and nothing discussed here should be considered flight training or regulatory guidance. Please always refer to official sources. This episode may also contain product placement. For further information, visit our website aviation-quest.cc.
This is already the 12th episode of Aviation-Quest CC, and we are recording this on the beginning of December 2025. And with me in the podcast cockpit, as usual, Stefan. My name is Jürgen. Welcome to the show, Stefan. Hi, on board again.
Yes, hello. How is it going? All good?
All good. To be precise, here it's December 5th. That everything is already here said and done. And I think we have another around 30 minutes podcast in front of us with quite, I can think of many people out there, especially youngsters looking forward for a professional career in aviation might be really interested in this series because part one, it was in the 11th episode, we had a ATP EL insights into your ground school experience back then at the Oxford Aviation Academy. You passed with flying colors. And well, in part two, we thought we make you airborne, Stefan.
Yes, yes. Let's go all the way back to the days of propellers.
When was it? To give a little bit of timeline here without nailing you down.
I think my flight, it was all in one training course. This must have been 2008, 2009. So we started off in the UK, then they sent us to Arizona into the desert, where we did some flying, and then they came back and did some more flying back in the UK.
Before we get to the real world flying, Aviation Quest CC is an audio cast, but we have also a YouTube channel thanks to Stefan's work with some flight simulation going on in the background without any connection to a topic wise, not related to our topic here, but also today. I think it's a real world flight from where to where, Stefan?
Yeah, so as always in the background, you can watch a flight, and today is from Munich to Palma de Mallorca. So we bring some German tourists onto the island.
Beautiful. And Aviation-Quest Podcast is the podcast at YouTube, and aviation-quest.cc is our homepage where you find all the information about us, about our work, and we are certainly already available on all the major podcast platforms. But well, into today's topic, how was this transition? They, so to say, packed the whole flight school into a 777 westbound, and a couple of hours later, here we fly Canada, or what?
Yeah, the flying, I mean, obviously the flying is the fun part of the whole thing. At least for me, it was. Initially, my route was a little bit different because I already entered the school with flight experience. I already had a PPL when I entered the academy. So I was at the flight club before in Oxford, and I was flying Warriors, did my PPL, paid for it myself, and did a bit of flying around. So when I entered the flight school, we skipped the whole, takeoff, landing, level flights, turning left, turning right, and went straight onto navigation and all that stuff. The one thing I would say is the step up from PPL to CPL is quite steep. And the next big step up is if you want to do a multi-engine instrument rating. That is actually the one part of flying where you really, really have to work with a lot of numbers, do lots of maths, and where it gets a bit intimidating, and it becomes more technical. And like when you do your PPL and you do VFR flying, I follow roads, all that stuff. You look outside, you enjoy the views. I remember I took my wife down to the south of England. We landed on a grass strip, went to the pub, had a nice meal, flew back home. Those things are amazing when you have a PPL. CPL and then multi-engine IR is a completely different way of flying, way more technical, lots of calculations. You never look outside, you only use your instruments. So that was a big learning curve. But all in all, before we get into more details, I would say I really enjoyed the flying. I loved it. It's obviously what you want to do, what you're there to do. And once you start flying aircraft, for me at least, it was always a lot of fun.
But Stefan, this sounds to me like, yeah, in the theory phase, you all were trained together with the other students, but the practical phase, was it more individualized? Because you must have been ahead of most of the other students, or am I wrong here?
Yeah, there was a mix in my class. We even had some people that came from the military, so they had a lot of experience.
Ah, okay, wow.
Yeah, so they just had to do some conversions. Some people had never flown before. So once we went into the flying phase, we were broken up into groups. And I was with two other guys who were roughly at the same stage where I was at. We were given one instructor and he would fly with the three of us. So the idea is that one guy sits in the back and observes. And then the next flight you swap seats, and then the other guy flies and the other one observes. It sounds weird, but actually observing you can learn a lot. You because you're not that much into flying, you have more capacity, you can think ahead, and it actually taught me a lot by just looking at someone else flying, I don't know, an ILS or an NDB hold and all that stuff. So that's how we did it. Yeah.
Was there also theory going on? So another ground school, maybe more practical related, or was it pure flying and the rest of the time enjoy Canada?
No, there was a lot of theory going on. They would usually give you things to prepare for the next flight, especially once you do instrument ratings and multi-engine flight. They would give you a flight route to prepare. They would expect you to have looked at everything, all the charts, be aware of any, I don't know, no-fly zones, anything like that. Maybe we would try something new, like let's say an NDB hold. They would expect you to have studied that, the different entries, how to fly an NDB hold. Obviously, there would be a briefing where we would go over it, but the briefings were quite short. It was more like, are there any questions? Let's discuss it. And then you went into the aircraft and started flying. So it was a mix of both. Still not ground school as such. You had to do this in your own time, but you were expected to show up prepared. And of course, if students that showed up not prepared, let's just say that didn't go down so well with the flight school. So of course we had fun. We went out in the evening. Weekends we had off, which was great. So we would go to a steakhouse somewhere and stuff like that. And but yeah, during the week, especially when you had a very early morning flight. The minute the sun was up, we started flying. You had to get up very, very early, prepare everything, and then you would come back early afternoon, usually very tired, get some food, and then already start preparing for the next flight the next day.
Must admit, the question was more a little bit jokingly because I already knew the answer. I don't know if you remember our private conversation, but you told me once, Stefan, that you were sometimes really happy that the weather was not so good outside, that you could take all the time after flying and study. And so, from what I was taking from this conversation was eat, study, fly, repeat, something like this, and sleep in between.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, we didn't have many bad weather days. So just to clarify, I went to Canada as well, but this was after I did my PPL, because in order to do a CPL, you need to have a certain amount of hours. So I went to Canada to build up the hours for that. And Canada is perfect because you have huge distances of nothingness where you just fly in a straight line for many hours. So you can build the hours very quickly. And it's obviously a lot cheaper than in Europe. Then I came back, did flying in the UK, and then for the CPL, I was sent to Arizona. That's why Canada, UK, US, which by the way was super interesting. If I may just explain, in Canada, I was in the winter time. It was minus 40, minus 45 sometimes. I flew up to into the Arctic Circle, which was super, super interesting in terms of navigation, because the compass becomes extremely unreliable up there. Obviously, cold weather flying, there's a lot to learn with low level jet streams. You cannot shock cool the engine, so you must never go into idle. All these things. I had to land on frozen lakes and snow runways. So it was a super cool experience. And from that, I then went to Arizona into the desert, where it was super hot. The aircraft did not climb because the air was so hot. Uh,
Certainly, yeah.
so it went from one extreme to the other. But in hindsight, I'm super glad I did it this way, because I got to experience both ways of flying. The really cold, the really hot, and both. Uh, in both environments, you have different things you need to consider.
I remember in a private chat you told me something like you were told to not to leave the car in Canada when there was something wrong with the car, wasn't it? Because it's you get outside and this could be the end.
Yeah, yeah. They said, I think if there's wind chill or something, they said something you have about 5 minutes before your body
Wow.
shuts down. Same with the aircraft. They said if you
Yeah.
taxi out to the runway and you have a flat tire, do not walk,
Yeah.
do not walk back to the hangar. You're not going to make it. You will never arrive at the hangar. You stay in the aircraft, you call someone, they come and pick you up. Yeah, these are pretty extreme environments, but again, it was a super cool experience.
Yeah, but I mean the wind drops, the icing, snow-covered runways, and then Arizona. It also sounds physically quite demanding.
Yes. For me, the cold was okay. I mean, it was, I had to cover my face and everything. No skin was allowed to be exposed to the cold because you get frostbites. But in Arizona, the heat was, pooh. When you sit in a little cockpit, they do have a little bit of aircon, but not really. There's just a bit of air blowing in. And when you're in the desert in the sun, that plane has been sitting on the tarmac, I don't know, for a few hours. I don't know how many degrees it's inside, maybe 60, 65. And yeah, I thought for me that was much harder than dealing with the cold, to be honest with you.
Mhm. I was just also wondering how this step would have been for you because one of your latest FS clip videos, as we record this, is how to do a one engine taxi at departure. And I mean, there you see, I recommend all the listeners to watch this video. I think you see the huge difference between a little plane or a single plane, single engine plane, and a real, an airliner. How did you master this transition, or how is this going on? Also from, single pilot operations to teamwork.
Yeah, that's a big step. If you
I
allow
can
me,
imagine. Yeah, it's a,
yeah, if you allow me, I'll take one step back before that. Going from single engine to multi-engine is already a big step, because all of a sudden you have two engines. You have to practice an engine failure uh, where all of a sudden you have asymmetric thrust, you need to trim, you need to feather the engine. There's so much going on. It becomes so much more complex. And all this is done in IFR. So, just for people that don't understand, IFR means you're not allowed to look outside. And they really, so what they did at my flight school, they cover all the windows completely. You cannot look outside, everything is covered up. The only thing you have is a teeny tiny window that they can slide open. It's about the size of like a matchbox in front of your eyes. You use that to take off. And the minute you lift off and the gear comes up, they close it, and that's it. You cannot see outside. The only thing you're allowed to look at are the instruments, and that's how you fly from A to B all the way down to minimums on the next runway. So you fly an ILS all the way down, and just at minimums, that little window is opened again, so you can see the runway right ahead of you, and that's how you land. So that's what we call IFR training. And of course, on top of that, at some points, he will take, or she, whoever is your instructor, will take a post-it note and will start covering instruments, pretending that they have now failed. So you will use your altimeter, you will lose your, I don't know, speed indicator, and then you have to still operate the aircraft safely with only certain instruments that are working. So that is already a huge step up from just flying, PPL from A to B, looking outside, taking pictures. And then if you add another engine to that, because at some point during all of this, they will just shut down an engine and say, okay, you've lost the engine. Usually you will come into land, you see the runway, and they will all of a sudden close that little window, which means you have to perform a go-round. You do a go-round, and in the go-round, they will shut down an engine. So there's so much going on, and that was a big, big, big step up from, flying a little Warrior or Cessna, down to the pub. But then the
I think
next,
all the listeners would be already, I hope a lot of the flight simulation enthusiasts already made notes about their next flights in the flight simulator. But certainly this can be practiced at home. But yeah, have fun and don't forget, do it by real air rules. So follow the air law.
of course, yes, of course. We had to fly into alpha airspace, which means super busy airspace. I was in the same frequency as, British Airways and American Airlines and Emirates, with my little Seneca on the same airway below them.
Yeah.
So
If you mess up, it gets really expensive.
yes, and the controllers were
I
not
can
very
imagine.
patient. You had to know
Maybe
what you
even
were doing.
dangerous, but it's for guaranteed really expensive.
Yes. So, to come back to your question, that was the big step up, the first one. And then the second one, obviously, you do this in a simulator. They put us into a Boeing 737 simulator, one of those big full motion ones. And we had to learn how to, first of all, fly a jet, how to work together as for the first time I was not the only pilot. There were two of us, and that again is something you have to learn, that you cannot just flick switches. That's a big no-no. Every time you touch something in the cockpit, you need to communicate this to your colleague. And even simple things, if air traffic control tells you turn left heading 250, the pilot flying turns the knob on 250, he points at it, he reads out 250. The other guy reads it out as well and says check, and only then are you allowed to initiate the turn. So everything has to be checked, cross-checked. Both pilots need to be fully aware of what's going on. And at the beginning, it feels so slow, because when you fly alone, you just, if you want to turn, you turn. You don't have to ask anyone. You just make your own decisions. But now there's two of you, and you often have to discuss things. But because the complexity goes up by so much, actually it makes perfect sense. And this is how I fly now in the airlines. We don't just do things, we communicate to the colleague, he checks. If he disagrees, he will say so. If not, you know, then we'll do it. And I found for the military guys, especially that had thousands of hours on fast jets, where they had to make very quick decisions on their own. For them, this two cockpit, two-man cockpit, two-pilot cockpit was very difficult. I trained with a military guy. He was super nice, amazing pilot. But when the workload went up and the stress level went up, he fell back into his old habits and started flicking switches without telling me what he was doing, for which obviously he was then told off. So, each and every step along the way has its own challenges. And you just have to learn. You just have to stick with it, get used to it, memorize things. And then at some point, you know what it's like. It makes a click in your brain, and then all of a sudden it becomes normal and second nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as with everything. But the next question, you you passed, as I said in the beginning, the theory part in Oxford with flying colors. Was this advantageous? I guess yes.
Yeah, of course, because the theory will make you understand what's happening to the aircraft, Uh, if you have a good grasp of theory, I mean, air law, as boring as it is, when you fly in
You
the
need it. You need it in the air.
of
This is
course.
also what our flight instructors told us in Niederöbel. I remember you need it. You have to be if you don't know it by heart in the air, you don't have a book.
Exactly. And you're operating within the law, within the air law. You must know the rules, otherwise, you're gonna mess up at some point, and then they're gonna say to you, "Well, hang on, you're a pilot. You should know this." You know what I mean? Are you gonna be flying into airspace you shouldn't be flying, or you're gonna fly too low or too high, or so. Of course, the better prepared you are for each flight, and that in a to a certain degree involves your ground school and making sure you retain that knowledge, the better you're gonna be, and the more relaxed you're gonna be because you know what's going on around you and you understand what's going on around you. So yes, answer to your question, absolutely helps a lot.
And what means ATPL at the end? What aircraft are you allowed to fly? And how ready are you, so to say, for the airlines? I guess you don't finish with a type rating for A320 or what?
No, I didn't. We finished with what's called a CPL, a commercial pilot's license.
Ah,
Um, so the way it works is you get a license, a commercial license, and on that license you add aircraft types. You can have single engine piston, SEP, for example, and that means with your license you are allowed to fly a Cessna. You cannot fly an Airbus because you're not trained for it. So then you do a type rating for a particular aircraft. In my case, it was the Airbus A320. And now on my license, on the second page, it does say Airbus A320. And but I'm only allowed to fly the 320. I cannot fly, I don't know, a 737 or even a 340 or whatever. I'm only allowed to fly this one aircraft, and that's it. So that's how that works. And in terms of difference between CPL and ATPL, this actually depends where you are in the world. Europe is a bit,
ah,
Europe is a bit unique in
yeah,
that once you do your CPL and you start flying commercially, they actually call it a frozen ATPL, which
yeah.
you keep until you have 1,500 hours. And then you can get an unfrozen ATPL, so like a normal ATPL. Uh, some airlines, especially the ones flying wide bodies, like if you want to fly 747, they want you on top of the minimum hours, they want you to have an ATPL, not a frozen ATPL or a CPL. So it's a licensing thing. There's no exam or anything like this. It's more like how the experience is structured with your license.
But I mean, you finished the ATPL theory in Oxford, and
Yes.
then with the practical, so to say, you had the commercial, and all in all, this was the so-called frozen ATPL, which makes you, so to say, able to apply to airlines. Period.
Exactly. Yes, you need to do the ATPL ground school. Without that,
Certainly,
yeah,
certainly.
without that, the CPL is pointless. If you want to fly commercially, then obviously you have to do the ATPL ground school. So, yeah, exactly. That's what it is. Now, a lot of airlines these days have a requirement in terms of minimum hours. And it really depends on who you want to fly for, and what aircraft they operate, and what they're looking for. I don't know if I remember back in the days when I looked around. If you wanted to fly for Emirates, you had to have at least 5,000 hours on wide body airliners in order to apply. So that's one example. So you need to start somewhere. You need to find your first job somehow, somewhere, to build up that experience to go to wherever you want to go. Some airlines are more relaxed. They will take you straight from flight school and train you up. It just means the training is going to be a lot tougher because you have no experience, and they demand a lot because they pay for the training. But yeah, that's just how it works with the licensing and how to get into an airliner. Yeah.
Yeah, but Stefan, you already gave a little bit a teaser for part three of our series because exactly this, I think, step many youngsters or maybe also interested folks out there who are looking forward for a career in aviation underestimate widely the step from the flight school, so frozen ATPL, into the, so to say, right seat of a 737, A320 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The final big step is then, getting that airliner job.
And deserves even an own podcast here.
Yes,
It will be, I
absolutely.
already can say this will be episode 13. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, to somehow wrap this episode up from today with this flying topic, were there any special memorable moments? Maybe a snowstorm briefing, or I don't know, a minus 15 degrees, whatever, or 40 degrees, sorry.
There were two things I really liked about my flight training. So in Canada, when I was doing a flight, because when the atmosphere is so cold, everything gets squished. I don't want to go into details. Things become much lower. So jet streams that you would normally encounter at, I don't know, flight level 280, all of a sudden are all the way down at 9,000 feet, 10,000 feet. And jet streams at that height are not that strong as they are high up, but they still exist. And I once saw a jet stream on my route coming the opposite direction of where I was going, and I decided to see what it's like to fly into it with my little Cessna. And I was flying, I can't remember, something like 75 knots into the jet stream, and my ground speed was 0. So when I looked down, I did not move because the air went past the aircraft at 70 knots. I flew forward 70 knots. I looked down at the forest, and there was literally stationary. And that was a really cool thing to see, that I could just sort of hover in the air. The other thing that it was a bit later on, when you do your first type rating for a jet, the authorities, at least here in Europe, they are not happy with you just doing everything on the sim and then going straight to flying passengers. You have to do landing training on the real aircraft. So there was, I think, 5 or 6 of us, all brand new. we sat on the plane, the six of us. We took the plane to an airport in Germany. I think it was Erfurt, and then you just fly circuits in an A320, and you touch down, you do a you do a touch and go, another circuit, another touch and go, and everybody does it 6 7 times, and then the next one comes another 6 7 times, and that was actually a lot of fun to fly an airliner for the first time in your whole life, like a real one. And this is what you do, fly circuits all the way around and just touch down, take off, touch down. And yeah, that to me was a really cool experience. Yeah.
I mean, I just can imagine that the whole flight phase experience and certainly the theory shaped you how you fly the Airbus today. Would you agree to this?
Yeah. It's the foundation that you will carry with you for quite some time. At some point, all your experience that you gain in the airliner world will take over, and what you learned at the beginning may, go more into the background. But in flying, you always rely on your experience, and when you start flying an airliner, the only experience you have is your flight school. Which brings me back to what I said last time. Make sure you pick a very good flight school that really prepares you for airliner flying, because when you start off, that will be the only experience you can rely on. And yeah, and it can be the difference between having a really, really hard time trying to figure all this out, or having a lot of fun, still working hard but enjoying it.
One of the last questions before I forget, Stefan. How long in months did it take you for you yeah, so to say, from you didn't came in with zero, but you know what I mean, from PPL to frozen ATPL.
Let me think. First thing I had to do was ground school, which I believe was something like 8 months or 9 months. And then it was in Phoenix, it was pretty full on because every day was sunshine. So there was almost never a day off. In the UK, it slowed down because, as you can probably imagine, the weather in the UK is not quite like in Arizona. Um,
IMC.
yeah, I mean, we did IMC flying, so that was the whole point. But quite often the wind was above limits, or there was freezing fog, or whatever. I think the flying phase must have been, I'm gonna say 9 10 months, something like this. Very intense. And then you do another few weeks on the 737 simulator, which goes fairly quickly. So yeah, so that's about the time frame. I think you
So in
can.
sports term, I'd say ATPL is a marathon, not a sprint, huh?
Yeah, but there's a lot squeezed in. So all in all, it took me 2 years to get my license.
A sprinted marathon.
Yes. It sounds like a long time, but in those 2 years, you have to learn a lot, and you have to learn a lot of skills. And it's not just about learning them, it's about mastering them. You have to acquire a huge amount of knowledge and retain it and understand it. And so those 2 years were extremely intense, I have to say. Um, if if there would be a way to make it a bit longer, I think it would not be a bad thing to do. Make it 2.5 years instead of two. But they just want you to go through as fast as you can, and they just push you all the time. That's just the nature of flight training.
Stefan, was a brilliant interview. Is there maybe a final advice or two you would give to young listeners dreaming of an airline past right now?
Like what I said last time, just keep your head down, work hard, study, take it seriously. But unlike ground school, where it's all about, maths and physics and learning stuff and formulas, this is the part of training that is actually enjoyable. Even when you fly with your instructor, I remember there were a few moments when we saw beautiful sunrise or sunset, and there are these moments where you just sit there with your instructor and you say, wow, this is so beautiful. And both of you physically relax for a few moments and just enjoy what's going on and enjoy the magic of flight before then the instructor shuts down an engine, you know.
Stefan, yeah, I think it was a great podcast, and I'd say I'm already looking forward for part or episode 13 with, as I already mentioned it, a really interesting and important topic from frozen ATPL to a hopefully well-paid right seat in an airliner.
Yes, yes, there's a lot.
The dream coming true.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot going on there as well. But yeah, thank you very much. As always, had a great time. Greetings to Austria. I guess it's very cold now, right, in Austria?
It is
Yeah.
winter time, but yeah, it's the clouds a little bit.
Okay.
But the only aircraft I've seen today was a police helicopter. So it's yeah.
Okay.
Yesterday it was, remember those middle school days, Stefan, when we were sitting in class and barely could see the neighborhood house. Exactly, this was the day yesterday. So
Ah,
really
okay.
nothing, everything. So here is just VFR. I think the police helicopter is the only exception here, and I guess I have no clue, but they seem to be a little bit more flexible, hopefully. But there was absolutely no. I think Hohenems is the airfield here is quite a quiet place in the
Yeah,
moment.
I can imagine. Well, I don't want to make you jealous, but here it's sunny and 22 degrees.
Okay, you made me jealous. End of the podcast.
Okay, good.
Thank you for listening to Aviation Quest CC Stories from Above. For more information about this episode and everything we do, visit our homepage aviation-quest.cc. We appreciate your time and support, and we'd love to have you back for the next episode. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep your passion for aviation flying high.